right, we are back with another Tuesday edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. We're going to offer live reaction to the College Football Playoff Committee's second set of rankings as they will come out roughly in 45 minutes or so. They were much quicker last week than we anticipated, so we jumped on at 6:30 tonight. My name is Pat Burnham. I am joined by Bob Ferrante, Curt Weiler, and former FSU offensive lineman, and our favorite football analyst, Mark Salva, and a man that has we're going to talk to you about the Miami FSU rivalry as we get started here. And actually, we're going to, a little bit later in the show, we're going to present the Osceola College Football Playoff rankings. We did our own. 7 people voted. We came out with 7 teams that received votes in our top 6 this weekend, which was more than last week where we only had 6 teams receive votes. So we're starting, as we get deeper into the season, we're starting to look at some more one-loss teams as viable candidates. If the College Football Committee's job is to select the best 4 teams, it's not the College Football Committee's job to select the best team, the most teams with the undefeated record. So a lot to parse out over the next 2 or 3 weeks, which we will. But guys, first of all, my first question is to Bob and Curt, because I gave up my favorite trip of the football season to Pittsburgh because I have been 7 or 8 times, and I thought it only fair since Bob and Curt had not been to a Pitt football game, I don't think. Forget the game. We'll get into the game here in a second. We're going to wrap up the game pretty quickly. But did I overhype the city of Pittsburgh?
No, we had a lot of fun. And honestly, we got restaurant recommendations from you, from some friends, and we could have eaten probably another week up in Pittsburgh. But then again, we would have tipped the scales and they may not have let us back on the Delta flight to Tallahassee. But it was a lot of fun. Good city. Good time.
Well, yeah, they let me on after Boston. So
I have a hard time imagining Curt and Bob painting the town red.
I didn't say painting the town red.
We're not trying to mislead you, Mark.
Well, listen,
we're
Mark,
responsible. Bob had a 7:00 flight out of there Sunday morning. There was no painting of town red. We enjoyed some football. We ate some Ferrante brothers after the game Saturday night. It was a good time.
Yeah, well, listen, it's not like you and I painted it. Well, Curt was with us. We didn't exactly paint the town red in Winston-Salem.
Well, it wasn't for lack of trying.
And we had a more advantageous kickoff time.
Right.
All right.
There's not a lot to paint there.
No, there's not. But it's a nice little town. It's a sleepy little Snuggy Hill town. And
yeah.
I like North Carolina, so I'm fine with any city in North Carolina for the most part. But anyway, yeah. So I'm glad you guys like Pittsburgh. All right, so I know we're going to put Pittsburgh to bed really quickly, and we're going to move on to Miami and the college football playoff, but have not had a chance to talk to you guys since the Pitt game ended. I thought there were some very positive things coming out of that game. The defense was dominant. They needed them to be while the offense found its legs without Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. They were able to beat Pitt without using Jordan Travis's legs very much. 7 runs for minus 16 yards. I think maybe 3 or 4 dedicated quarterback runs. Now, obviously, we found out that Keon and Johnny certainly affect the running game. It was not near as effective as it was with those 2 guys in the game. But just some of the things that you guys saw as positives, and then we'll wrap. I mean, and Mark, you can jump in. You've done second watch as well. But just a couple positives and a couple takeaways, and then we'll move on to Miami and the college football playoff. Because FSU is now going to the ACC title game because of that win.
Yeah, I thought, one of the biggest takeaways, honestly, was the third down stops. I mean, 0 for 11. And that hasn't happened, good research by the folks at Florida State, hasn't happened since 2016 at Florida. So it's been a little while since that kind of performance has happened. I think that's a good thing for Adam Fuller, good thing for this defense. Obviously, the 3 takeaways, that's what he's kind of preached. And that one by Fentrell Cypress, talking to him this morning, that was huge. For him to make that kind of hustle play. But that's ingrained in what these guys are trying to do, not to give up, to finish the play. I think finish the play has been something that they've kind of lived by. Offensively, it was definitely not aesthetically pleasing, but it did work in the end, I think, because Pitt was just worn down. Honestly, I think Florida State was able to get some plays through the Pitt defense, and it was not an easy second watch, guys. I'll be honest, but it was it was one that you're going to have some of those clunkers, to use the term by some of the national media. You're going to have some of those performances that just don't look pretty, but they get you to the finish line.
And dare I say, just about every team in the country is going to look a lot worse when they lose two receivers who have accounted for almost 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns this year between them. I mean, I think a big takeaway for me, I mean, that being down those two, being down 4 receivers overall, being down Jerrion Jones, who has played a lot for you this year and been pretty effective, I think, it would derail a lot of teams. I mean, this team is not, if they were to be without Keon and Johnny long-term, they're not winning a national title. They may not even make the playoff. They might not even kind of win the last 4. That's not going to be the case, obviously. I don't think we think that they're by any means that's the case for them. But I think it's encouraging that, I mean, with so many guys down, they were still able to grind that win out. It wasn't always pretty, but yet you blink and they have 500 yards of offense. Yeah, they only had, I think, 24 points, but, I mean, I wrote about it in my column. Notre Dame, that put up 58 points on them, only had about 30 more yards of offense against Pitt than you did. I mean, you, without so many guys and with the run game clearly a bit hampered by, I mean, yeah, less attention needing to be paid, or at least them kind of challenging those receivers that Florida State had outside. You still, I mean, you didn't finish drives, but I think that's where you really missed Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. They're red zone weapons. And so still, you moved the ball well, and it didn't derail your offense totally, which I think is encouraging.
Mark?
Well, the story of this game was the defense. They didn't have a chance, and when that happened, it gave you a little patience for the offense to find its legs and kind of respond to what Pitt was presenting on defense. They weren't an elite defense, not an elite defensive front, but they had an elite scheme, right? And so I think that kind of playing with one hand tied behind your back a little bit. I think Curt's right. I don't know. There's a team in America that could lose receivers of the caliber that we. I mean, it wasn't just Johnny and Keon. It was Hakeem. It was Dustin Hill was hampered.
Deuce
so was that
Deuce?
Yeah, Deuce Spann was out. So I mean, really, basically we were playing 7-on-7 and with tight ends. Right. And so when you have 2 tight ends in the game, obviously there's going to be a lot of people around the box. And so, it was tough. But credit to Florida State. It was a 24-7 win. I mean, right? I mean,
and listen, the defense was so dominant that it did not matter once Florida State got up 2 scores. That ball game was over. And listen, we saw the play call of the year to take the touchdown that made it 17-7. With my man Biscuit lining up at an offensive tackle. Pitt doesn't recognize it. Big old Bless Harris is lined up.
And let me say this. Hey, credit, look, offensive line struggled the first half, but they kind of found it there later in the game, started getting a feel for it. And that's my argument about running the ball. Oftentimes in the course of a game, you got to let those guys do some runs in a row and stay with the running game, and they begin figuring it out during the course of the game. Any good offensive line coach and offensive coordinator knows that. It's sometimes if things aren't quite working out, you got to let them kind of work it out on the field. You can't coach everything going into the game. You can't account for everything going into a game. And what you see on film may not translate. I mean, look, from the TV copy and from everything, they just played a game Thursday night on that field, right? That field was a mess. And so so there's a lot of factors that go into maybe why it didn't look so pretty, but it was a 24-7 win. Come on.
And I think
that was a team that beat Louisville, who we're probably going to see in the championship game. So it just goes to show, as good as Louisville appears to be, they went into that game all hyped up after having beat Notre Dame, right?
Yes.
They
Notre Dame impressively.
Right. And then go. So they're probably full of themselves a little bit. Didn't take Pitt quite so seriously. So that just shows you that when Pitt decides they're going to play and they're going to give you their best game, it's tough. So I give them a lot of credit for that win, even though it wasn't pretty. And like you said, during the course of a year, there's going to be games like that. There just is. And when I said at first watch, I recognize that game. I've been in a lot of games and been involved in a lot of games where you just can't get out of your own way sometimes. And that's the way it is sometimes.
Mark, I've got a question for you. All right, so obviously you played in some huge games when you played at Florida State that had not playoff ramifications, but ramifications of whether you were going to play for the national title or not. Now, I'm not talking about the Miamis and Floridas. I'm talking about some of the lesser-known opponents. Talk about when you are competing to stay in not only the ACC championship race, but you're also competing for a college football playoff. Talk a little bit about the pressure that players and coaches feel, because there is something to be said for that. I mean, there's a survive and advance metric to this. Yeah, mentality to this.
So I got a great example of this. Number one, you're not going to be up every game. You just can't. And emotionally, these are 18 to 22, 23-year-old kids and young men. And emotionally, you just can't be up every game. I remember my senior year, we just beat Auburn, and then I think we were going to play Furman and then play Florida. And we had beat Florida in 6 years.
I remember the Furman game.
Remember that Furman game?
Yeah.
Dude, I got fired halftime. They had a nose guard. I'll never forget his name. His name was Daryl Ferguson. He was probably 6'2", 240 pounds, but he was kind of like a Ron Simmons type, not a real big guy, but really big weight room guy. And he could run like crazy. Dude, that guy ate my lunch. I wasn't 100% into the game, I guess. And I remember coming off the field and McDuffie just screaming at me and fired me, played Michael Tanks the rest of the game. And so it just goes to show, after a big win at Auburn we just had at Auburn, getting ready to play Florida, we got Furman coming in. And of course, Maricopa, I wasn't 100% into. I just thought, well, we were all right. It's just Furman. And a little bitty Furman kind of gave it to us. So
you were probably thinking about your date with Julie after the game and getting to the first before everybody else. I get it.
I guarantee you.
Yeah. So but listen, it's different when you got that kind of pressure on you. And now, good news is, I think as we move forward to Miami, I think that you forget about the pressure because it's Miami. If there's pressure to win that game outside of the college football playoff, and obviously you've already locked down your spot in the ACC championship game. We've been joined by Nick Carlisle.
Well, hello there.
By the way, if you have not gone to the Osceola.com, Nick's got a great story on Camden Friars recruitment, and obviously his father played at Florida State. I have not gotten a chance to read the entire thing yet because I've been working on a couple things today. But Nick, just tell us a little bit about that story and what it was like to talk to. I don't know. Were you old enough to watch Matt Fryer play? I don't think.
No, I'm a '97 kid.
Not
quite.
God! Yeah, no, you're
quite.
Not quite at
not
all.
to make you feel too old there. No, it was honestly a great experience. They're a very, some recruits obviously are naturally a little bit more quiet, but both Camden and his father are very candid people. So we got about 40 minutes with them and got to talk a little bit about not only Matt being a part of the 1993 national championship team, but both of Camden's uncles, both Todd and I think Jason, I think is the other one's name. He was also part of the 99 team. So there was a legitimate, we knew that the Fryer was a legacy kid, but to have this much of championship DNA in your family, to find out that he didn't want to go to Florida State for the first 2 years of his recruiting process, it was a genuinely great story to find out how he kind of changed his mind and how he became one of the first 3 recruits of what has turned into a top 5 recruiting class. So I recommend, obviously I'm a little bit biased because I wrote the story, but I definitely recommend traveling over to the Osceola.com to read it, because I think it's good to learn about kids like this and, how they come to what ends up being a really huge decision.
Yeah, that is a huge decision, particularly now with everything that's involved in making a decision to go to a college, including NIL. But anyway, yeah, so I can't wait to read the rest of it. I think it was fascinating. Obviously, I've known Matt, Mark and I have for a long, long time. I can remember riding around Tallahassee in Matt's convertible Mustang listening to George Strait. So it's been I've known that family for a long time. And when I always, when I was, depending on where I was living at the time in college, there was a lot of Saturday nights where I ended up on Matt Fryer and Bill Reagan's couch at Burt Reynolds Hall, so I didn't have to drive home. So I think I can't wait to read that story. But yeah, so listen, we've kind of put Pitt to bed. We'll get into Miami throughout the show, but guys, obviously, I think this is a game that we all look forward to every year, regardless of what the records are. It's as Mario Cristobal said at his Monday presser, he thinks it's the best game in college football. Of course, he's as biased as we are because he's a Miami guy, and like Mark, played in that series. Mark, we'll go back to you real quick. As a former player, one thing that Mario mentioned about this particular game is the intensity level at which it's played. It's another game just like every other game, but it's not another game just like every other game. Try to explain that to us that have not played in a rivalry of that magnitude.
Well, obviously it starts with the familiarity on the rosters of both teams. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody sees everybody. We all know the same people. We played against each other in high school. I mean, that's a real thing, right?
Yep.
We all got recruited. We probably went on recruiting trips together with a lot of those guys. I remember when I went on my recruiting trip to Miami, I went, with Brett Perriman and I mean, so it's one of those deals where the familiarity obviously breeds competition, and then it's a game that's always played at the highest level, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what, there are playmakers all over the field, but it's like we just talked about Pitt and how we probably didn't play our best, and there was some, we had to kind of feel our way around. I guarantee you, when going into this game, these guys are going to play the best they can play, and on both sides of the ball, So we're going to get their best shot. They're going to get our best shot, and the best team usually wins, but not always. Sometimes it's so even that it now becomes a matter of, okay, who makes the first mistake or the biggest mistake or the biggest play, And so because that's out there, because that's the stakes of the game, it's just the pressure. It's not so much, you don't feel the pressure, right? But it's hard to explain. You just know that you're going to play your best. I mean, my best games were against Miami in Florida. When I played my best, those were my best games. And for whatever reason, it's just, and then I've won and I've lost. And I've lost some crushers to this team. And I think the one thing you can always say is that no matter where you are in the course of the game, it's never over. And you got to go in with that mentality that no matter who's up, if there's time left on the clock, it's not over, and you got to go in with that mentality. So it's intense. It really is intense,
especially when the scores differences of 3 points or less. So it's definitely,
no question.
It's definitely not over.
I mean, my senior year, we were up 19-3.
Yes, I remember
at halftime and lost 26-25. I mean, it was that was a crusher, right?
I still remember that Sunday after that game, Mark. I was actually in college working for Jerry at the Osceola. Now I was not writing. I was pretty much proofreading and clipping hedges out in front of the building and those kind of things, and stuffing envelopes because I was just trying to find beer money. But I remember going to the Osceola that morning after that game, and it was like a Western town. There was nobody on the streets. The wind was blowing. I think it was about 50 degrees. I remember pieces of paper blowing through down Pensacola Street like tumbleweeds. I mean, it was just, I still never forget that day.
I never cried after a game except that game. I literally was crushed. And I will tell you, that's the only Wayne McDuffie, I remember him coming in the locker room and gave me a hug that game.
That's the only hug you ever got from Wayne.
Only hug ever got from Wayne. Probably not, but seriously, I mean, that's how crushing it was. I mean, Sammy Smith had 190 yards rushing that game. They hadn't given up a 100-yard rusher all year, and it probably didn't after that game. We just blew them out, but we lost the game. That was a crusher. And then of course the wins are big too, right? And so I remember winning in '93 when Devin Bush intercepted that ball. For the '93 championship year, that was just, the place was so nuts. And then Dexter Carter running around the edge and scoring that touchdown in 88, 80, I think it was 80, it'll be 89.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Bernard
I don't know
Clark on the flag
the flag on the head. I don't know that Doug's ever been as loud as that after that run.
That was a great night.
That was a tremendous night.
Isn't that the night Fryer had the long touchdown pass down the Miami sideline?
No, that was the 93 game.
Oh, so was it Lawrence that had the touchdown down the sideline?
No, that was Florida.
All right.
You think Florida?
Oh, my memory is shot. I'm old. All right, so let's. So Bob and Curt, kind of your early impressions of Miami. We're just now getting into our breakdown of them, but obviously we've all watched them when we can on Saturdays. And then obviously my second question: you guys were at practice today. What can you tell us after you tell us about your initial thoughts about this game? And we're planning on coming back later in the week and talk a little bit more in depth about Miami. But just your early thoughts on the Miami game and what injuries may impact it, or who we know could be back on Saturday.
Yeah, I think the big thing is seeing Johnny Wilson back out there, and he looks a lot like his old self. There's not a green jersey on, and he's moving around really well. Saw him kind of go up over a walk-on DB and make that kind of Johnny Wilson type of catch down the sideline. So he looks good. Yeah, I think that's the biggest positive. You can obviously go on our YouTube channel and check out, Curt's video highlights, Keon Coleman taking punt returns. So, a lot of positives. I think, like Mark mentioned, of course, it had to lean on the tight ends at Pittsburgh. It just absolutely had to. And those guys were just clutch. Jordan Travis hitting the tight ends for about half those passes that he completed up at Pittsburgh. So, positive developments here, because you're going to need as many receiving options as possible against Miami, because even though they've been incredibly inconsistent, you're pretty much going to get their best effort when it comes to this game on Saturday.
Well, and it does bear mentioning, too. I think some people tried to worry a bit about Jordan getting pulled from the Pitt game early. I think they caught on camera him pointing to his knee or something. Jordan was out there today, was a full participant, was fine, like Mike Norvell said. So it does not seem like that's remotely an issue coming into the week.
Yeah, well, he probably had an owie, like Dino Babers like to say. When you're hurt, you kind of get a little dinged up, but you're not really hurt. So I think Jordan probably had a little owie. And listen, I think Jordan Travis, as we have all known him to be, even if Jordan Travis has an owie, he is going to come out full scale against the Hurricanes. And I think we're probably going to see break glass in case of playing Miami, because I think we're going to see a lot more Jordan Travis running the ball against Miami. I think we're going to go back to what we saw against Duke. But yes, it was. I'm glad to hear that Jordan is very healthy and practicing and looking like 13. Because listen, he carried this. The story of the day in Pitt was Jordan Travis and the defense. I mean, those were the two key components of that game, and obviously. The great thing was that Florida State's defense gave Florida State's offense a chance to find its sea legs without the use of Coleman and Wilson's legs. So good stuff there. But yeah, all right. So
talking about Miami, I can talk about. I realized we didn't go into that. We talked on the Florida State stuff. Sorry, I cut you off. I don't know what to make of this team.
Which one, the Miami team?
Yeah, I think they're capable of being real good and putting up 48 points against Texas A&M, and they're capable of scoring how many did they score and lose at home to Georgia Tech and putting up 6 at NC State. I mean, the offense hasn't been especially good lately. I think the defense, especially the pass rush, has been really good this season.
Yep.
But like Mark said, I mean, I think you expect, given this game, that you're going to get their best shot. I mean, you might see a better offensive performance from them than you've seen in quite a while. I don't think they've scored over 31 points since September, but they're definitely capable, and they have some weapons. I'll be interested to see who plays quarterback for them, because Mario's playing the gamesmanship game there a little bit, like a few people have lately against Florida State.
Yeah, and listen, that was but his answers were really weird on that subject. Like, he almost made it sound like he was going to bench. I mean, because he had every chance to come out and say, Tyler Van Dyke is our quarterback. And what he said was, Tyler's tough. Tyler's going to rebound from these 4 bad outings where he's thrown 10 touchdowns, and he's going to be the great teammate that he is. Now, when he said that, you can read it now.
But he defended him.
Mario spent 45 minutes saying nothing. I mean, it was remarkable to sit there and transcribe that interview. I mean, it really was. But anyway, yeah. So I agree. There's a little sportsmanship going on, but I have a hard time believing they're not going to start a healthy Tyler Van Dyke. I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, it's sure. I'm sure people are claiming. I mean, what do they always say? The most popular person from the fan base is the backup quarterback when the QB is struggling.
yep.
But you look at Emory Williams, the true freshman, who I knew Florida State recruited a little bit. They had to start him against Clemson because TVD was hurt. And I think he threw the ball like over 30 times for like 150 yards. He was not particularly effective. And this would be a tough situation to throw a true freshman into for sure. And I just can't see if, like you said, unless Tyler Van Dyke can't play, like kind of like he was going into last year's game where he tried to play and eventually had to just call it quits because he kind of re-injured his leg or whatever it was. But I can't see. I think it feels like the gamesmanship when nothing's going to happen because I don't think throwing a true freshman into that atmosphere at Doak Saturday is a recipe for success.
Yeah, and listen, as bad as they have struggled in the passing game, and I think it's been more turnovers than it has been anything else. He had 4 turnovers in that game with a fumble. But even as bad as Mario is saying the passing game has regressed, they're still 41st in passing offense, second only to LSU on FSU schedule. They're 15th in college football in completion percentage. Again, second only to LSU on FSU schedule. And they're 39th in the country in pass plays over 10 yards. Second and third only to LSU and Florida Miami and LSU and Florida on Florida State schedule. So we are going to get a chance to see whether this improvement we've seen out of the secondary is valid. They're going to get a chance to validate that. And listen, their stats on defense aren't great everywhere, but just like Pitt, they make a living in the opposing team's backfields. They're among the nation's top leaders in tackles for losses and for sacks. And then obviously the other part of the passing game for Miami is they're really good at protecting Van Dyke and Williams. They've only been sacked 11 times all year, and they've thrown 300 passes. That's tied with Duke and Virginia Tech on Florida State's roster for sacks allowed, but Duke and Virginia Tech, and they've thrown a tremendous amount more passes than Miami has in those other two. So
it's no big secret that Mario wants to run the ball, and that's what this team is built to do. And the best thing they can do to protect Van Dyke is to run the football. And I imagine we're going to get a heavy dose of that. And I imagine they're going to, if I'm them, I'm going to try to protect him by making some easy throws, screens, maybe a couple RPOs. I don't know, but I don't know how he does on those. But and he likes to target Restrepo, and he's an oily guy, right? I mean, he's hard to cover him, man, but he's going to find soft spots and zones, and how we handle him is going to be a deal. So I expect we're going to get a heavy dose of the run, little play action, screens, and a lot of Restrepo on third down.
Well, and just we're getting ready to present our rankings because I believe the show is about 30 seconds from starting. But just in case it happens to be a talking point next week, fourth down could be something we're talking about. It usually is, one way or the other. Miami has the fourth best defense in college football. Third best defense in all of college football in defending fourth down. Only 20%, 2 of 10 fourth down surrendered. FSU ranks 47th and 57th in fourth down conversions made. Call me a cynic, but I think next Tuesday we're going to be sitting here talking about a fourth down call that went one way or the other. So we'll keep an eye on that as we get ready to go to game day. All right, so we are going to get into our college football rankings. They're getting ready to start right now. So what we did different this week, last week we gave everyone's individual college football playoff rankings. So what we did today was I sent out an email. Everybody voted. You got 6 points for first place, one, and then back to 1 point for sixth place. And so we had 7 people vote. Bob, Curt, Mark, Nick, myself, and Jerry voted. And here are the Osceola's college football rankings as we head to week 2 of the rankings. And we had Georgia was a runaway at number 1, Florida State number 2, Ohio State number 3, Washington 4, 5 Michigan, 6 Oregon, and for the first time in our poll, Alabama got votes. They got 4 points. out of a possible, what was it, 6 times 6, 36 points. They got out of a possible 36. They got 4, but they're in it. And one person had them in his top 4, and his name is not Pat Burnham. So I know that's where the blame was going to go. It was not me. I had them 6th, and I explained that in Takeaway Tuesday why I put them over Ohio State. So it is going to be interesting. All right, so that's where we have them ranked. I want to ask each of you where you had Florida State ranked in your poll, and then where do you think the College Football Playoff Committee will rank them? Bob, I'll start with you.
I've got Florida State 3. I know that's up from 4 last week. I just still think a better team than Michigan. The committee still loves Michigan, even though the body of work is not yet there.
Curt?
Yeah, I have Florida State 3 as well. I had them 2 last week. I was trying to, I think, more guess what the committee would do last week. This is more my personal thoughts. As for what I think the committee, I think Florida State will stay 4. I'm not sure that USC win moves that Washington ahead of Florida State. Even if it does, people will panic. They shouldn't, because that will sort itself out. Florida State, if they win out, will be in, but it will definitely be a panic if Florida State does fall to 5th tonight.
Mark?
Yeah, I had FSU too. And for the simple reason, I know the LSU win now is not as big after Alabama, but I will say that the Clemson win is now better, right? Yep. After having beat Notre Dame. And so everybody was, harping on Ohio State had a great win against Notre Dame, and the team that we beat in their place lost, Notre Dame lost to them. So I think that kind of cancels each other out in my eyes a little bit. So I kept them at 2. And quite simply, I just think, when I look at, I think the quarterbacks are the ones that are going to drive this thing. And for me, I think that's the most important thing. And that's kind of why I ranked them like I did, looking for the most complete teams. And I think, even though we do have flaws, so does everybody else. And I think our flaws are a little bit, we can overcome our flaws a little better than maybe some of the other ones when it comes down to scoring points and stopping people.
Yeah, and I will also think that goes back to Jordan Travis. I think he's probably the most dynamic playmaker out of all those quarterbacks that are in the top 6. He can do it with his legs. We saw him do it with his arm all day on Saturday. And listen, Dabo's right. Stock up, baby. Clemson came through for Florida State. I'm not buying any stock into Clemson, but they certainly helped Florida State stock. So thank you, Dabo. It's about time he came through this year. Listen, Phil Maffa looked incredible. I think maybe they just hold out number 1 or number 0, whatever the other running back's number is.
Shipley.
But because Maffa looked like Herschel Walker at times out there on Saturday. It was an impressive performance by him, but certainly. All right, Nick. So give us your thoughts on where you had Florida State and where you think they will end up in these rankings.
So if we're trying to predict where we think the committee is going to place Florida State, I think Florida State is going to remain at number 4, and that's why I had Florida State at number 4. I think in the mind of the committee, I think Florida State is probably, until something happens to either Michigan or Ohio State. I think Michigan plays Penn State this week, if I remember correctly.
They do.
So until there is some kind of movement between Michigan and Ohio State, I think Georgia will stay number 1. I think Ohio State dropped this week with how they play at Rutgers. Florida State, for me, will always kind of remain in that 4 spot until something happens in front of them. I don't think that the community values if we're going to go into conference biases here. And again, it's all about trying to get into the mind of the committee. I don't think they value the ACC as highly, and I don't think they value Florida State's schedule as highly because LSU lost again. And even though Boston College is looking like a better win, Clemson is looking like a better win. I think Florida State is going to remain at number 4 until something happens ahead of them.
Yeah. Listen, I have Florida State at 4. I'm putting more weight on unbeatens right now than I am anything else. Now, I do think that as we start to get to that last poll, I think that there's going to be some legitimate arguments for some of these one-loss teams, particularly Alabama. They look the part right now. That quarterback has gotten much better. And I think we have to remember the College Football Playoff Committee's job is to find the 4 best teams, not the 4 teams.
That's kind of the way I was operating under. I'm operating under who do I think are the 4 best teams? Who are the most complete teams? Who do I think would win? And so mea culpa, I had Alabama up there. I did. I just think I'm not giving Michigan or Ohio State a whole lot of credit because I just don't think that highly of the rest of the Big Ten, other than Penn State, which is a legitimate team. But Michigan, to me, they hadn't done anything.
All right. So did anybody ding Michigan because of the sign stealing thing?
Not because of that,
No.
but that's a good point because it does bring into question the legitimacy of their wins, right?
All right. Well, hold on. Do you know there was a report today that said there was organized signal stealing and they were shopping it around the Big Ten. So there were.
Let's just close down the whole conference.
Yes.
It's funny.
Well,
it's funny how that didn't come out.
Point is it happens everywhere.
Not to the degree Michigan did. Michigan, you can't. It's not apples to oranges. This is a step, I guess, in the wrong direction for any Big Ten opponents for sure. But what about the teams outside the Big Ten? Michigan was doing it too.
Well, my point is I don't think they're the – I've said this from the get-go. We need to wait till all the facts come out because there's going to be more facts come out, and this is a systematic thing. That was what the other teams did, if you believe the report, was every bit as systematic as what Michigan did. Michigan was just aggressive enough to do it on its own. The other schools, and I can't tell you who they are, but the other schools decided to share it with each other, which we all know that goes on. So anyway, yeah, I just think –
go ahead. They're almost up to the top 10. But
yes,
we can.
But yeah, I just think that's kind of how these this thing is just kind of plays itself out. We'll see how it goes. But I did find that fascinating that Michigan, of course, I think some of this is Michigan's gone out and found this information. Well, somebody volunteered the information to one of Michigan's assistant coaches. But so anyway, yeah, it's just I think we're getting into the optics of how Michigan's sign stealing looks versus everybody else. And is it over the top? I'd agree it's over the top, but we're fixing to find out the other people are doing it is what I took away from that article. All right, so Curt, what we got going on in the polls?
Louisville moved up 2 spots in terms of relevant information. They're 11th. I mean, if they win out, that's going to be another top 10 win for Florida State in Charlotte, which I think feels significant. Penn State is at 10. That's where we are right now. That's starting the top 10.
Yes, and Louisville has Virginia this week and at Miami next week. So they've
and then Kentucky, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, yeah, they need to, for Florida State's sake, they need to win all 3.
Louisville's probably a top 10 team next week if they win and Penn State loses to Michigan, which I would say I probably expect them to do.
Yeah. Well,
where's the Penn State Michigan game at?
Oh.
I'll look that up really quickly.
At Michigan, but I'm not positive.
It is at Penn State.
It's at Penn State.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's probably a whiteout too.
Because they wouldn't host those two like at home in the same team in the Ohio State Michigan games in Ann Arbor this year.
Ooh. I don't know how y'all value night games versus day games, but that's a 12:00 game.
That's that big noon kickoff.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're going a Penn State whiteout at night is a different atmosphere. That is true. That is one of the best atmospheres in college football. So I think Michigan probably got a little bit lucky with that time slot, depending on whether or not you value that type of thing, of course. But
Ole Miss is 9. They just put that up there. But that's another team. They got Georgia this week, so that's another spot. Louisville could maybe move up if Louisville takes care of business and chalk holds there.
Or the Lane train could derail the Bulldogs and make the college football playoff really.
Wouldn't that be funny? Wouldn't that be great?
They got a better shot to me than Tennessee. I'm not sure the defense is good enough, but Alabama 8.
Yeah, they're gonna end up being in. If they take care of business, they're gonna end up being in this conversation in 3 weeks after
Alabama.
Yeah, they'll end up being in.
They'll have to beat Georgia, but
over a 1-loss Texas.
Well, I think if you go look at Alabama is the only team in America that has 3 wins over top 25 teams. So
the only reason I have them over Texas. The only reason I have them over Texas is because Quinn Ewers is out, right? Yep. So they're playing with their second quarterback.
And Texas is not going to have a great win like that Oklahoma win that you thought would if they got a rematch. It might not be Oklahoma anymore, and it's not going to be a great quality win in the conference championship game.
Right. But that'll be interesting because, people that scream that the games matter are going to say that, if it comes down to a 1-loss team getting in, is it Alabama or is it Texas?
Well, listen, I think we all have bias, right? And I think the committee's got it too, right? I mean, listen, I grew up watching SEC and ACC football. I'm more biased to those schools than I don't mean to, but I think the SEC is much stronger conference than the Pac-12, as good as the Pac-12 is this year.
how much do you allow for growth in the course of a year, right? So Alabama that lost to Texas is not the same Alabama we have now, and probably won't be the same Alabama in 3 weeks, right? So does that factor, even though they won in September, right, or October, whenever it was, does that? I mean, do you lend credence to that fact that they're a different team? They found themselves. They've got an offense. They've got their quarterback now. It's the same thing you can say about us in Boston College, but you can say the same thing for Alabama and South Florida. They almost lost to South Florida. That game was nip and tuck. And even though Jade Milroe didn't play it down that game, they played those other two yahoos and almost lost the game.
Listen, do not
but the Boston College win is age
underestimate the South Florida Bulls. For years, they have gone into places they have no business in. Miami, Notre Dame. Let me tell you all the teams Florida State. Let me tell you all the teams we knocked off.
Texas is 7, by the way, guys. They're going to commercial, I think, or they're about to do the top 6. Texas is 7.
Look, here's the deal. It's the thing that burns me up. It's like the committee will say one thing and apply it to one team, but then that same thing doesn't apply to another team, right? So they're going to say, well, they struggled against Boston College and they struggled against Duke. Duke is a good team, but they're struggling right now. And so, but then they turn around and say Alabama has a great win. But there's no mention about the struggle against South Florida, or there's going to be no mention of Ohio State struggling with Rutgers, right? I mean, and so they don't apply evenly these same arguments, and that's the thing that kind of drives me crazy. They just they justify their picks on random things that and they don't marry up, and they're not consistent for every team.
Well, let me ask you
this. Boo Corrigan did that last week on the show. He mentioned the Boston College game, and then he didn't mention. He talked about Georgia. They're really rolling into form. They dominated Kentucky, dominated Florida, and it's like, well, what was happening before that? You're just not. It was right. Literally, yeah. It was.
Well, let me ask you.
What have you done for me lately?
Oregon is 6. Oregon is 6.
Oregon is 6. All right. Let me ask you this question. Unfortunately, we may get there before. Do you think Oregon? Do you think Florida State beating Pitt without 2 of its best offensive players helps or hurts them in the with this?
I think it helps them. I think it helps.
Do they pay attention to that? Hopefully,
yeah. That's what I would say. Is do they actually pay attention to the fact that Florida State was down 5 wide receivers, or do they see that as a game where it was a 10-7 game at halftime when Pitt was a 21-point underdog?
It's not the 5 wide receivers I'm worried about. I think they got to be aware that Keon Coleman didn't play that game, and Florida still.
Yeah, but you would hope so. But
I will say this: it was prominent that comment about not having those 2 guys in the game was prominent. And anytime they talked about that game, so I think if they're half paid attention, they know that, right? And I'm sure if they're having in-depth discussions and they're looking at games and they're looking at the latest games, they got to know that, right?
Yep.
Florida State's holding firm. Washington's 5. Florida State's 4.
Yep.
All right,
about what I expected.
That's Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia.
I think if Washington wins out, it might end up ahead of Florida State. That's a tough task because it involves beating Oregon again, and I think Oregon's a better team than them. But I do think if Washington beats out, it probably has a better resume. If Georgia, Michigan State, or Ohio or Michigan or Ohio State and Washington all win out, Florida State's probably 4.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think the odds of that are pretty long. Michigan's 3. So it looks like I think they're going to – we'll see if they move Georgia 1, but I think they're holding firm.
Georgia should be 1.
I agree. We'll see if they punish Ohio State / I mean, that was a good win. That Missouri team is very good.
Yeah.
They got some dudes at wide receiver.
The only thing that worries me is, Ohio State actually looked like it could – well, actually, they had a touchdown return for an interception return for a touchdown. So their offense actually put less than 30 points on the board again. So, I don't understand where they're going with this Ohio State #1 crap. I don't get it. I don't even have them in my top 6.
Well, I mean, depending on –
just 2.
There we go.
Oh, man. No, it's okay. No, I mean, just watching that Rutgers-Ohio State game, and, if you're one of the type of people that, likes to point to key calls in the game – during that pick 6 return, there was questionable targeting on the play too. So I mean, that's a no call away from that game turning into an even bigger dogfight than it was. I'm not the committee, but I do not understand how you see Georgia handling business against a very good Missouri team and then still keeping them at 2 over Ohio State team that was a couple of plays away from being in a really scrappy game with a Rutgers team.
But I guess since Georgia's not beating everybody 50-3 this year, everybody thinks they're falling off the face of the earth.
Neither is Florida State.
I bet if Georgia wins, who's Ohio State got this week? I bet if Georgia beats Ole Miss, another top 15 team, they hop them next week. See who Ohio State's got. Yeah, they got Michigan State. So, yes, I think that should be the case. Whether it happens or not, I guess I don't know. But
yeah, you would think they'd beat Michigan State. But didn't Michigan State beat somebody? They beat Nebraska the other day?
Yeah, no, I meant it should happen that I think Georgia should move to 1 if they beat Ole Miss this weekend.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Relative to that Ohio State win. I think that's,
And does Georgia still have Tennessee to play?
Yeah. Those are the last 2 SEC games.
If they win those 2, they'll be number 1 for sure coming out. As long as they don't screw up at least going in the championship weekend, they'd be number 1, I think. Although if Michigan were to handle Ohio State or vice versa handily, you could see that might get some more support for them. But listen, it's going to be awesome. And listen, what if chaos breaks out and all these undefeated teams have 1 loss? Then it really gets interesting. I don't know if I want to see that, but I think that would be I think we get into a lot of minutia. I think Oregon slides up. I think Alabama slides up if you start getting into that. But so no surprises.
Right, let me ask you this. All right, say, we're going to be favoring every game pretty comfortably, right? So say we went out. Say Alabama beats Georgia and Ohio State beats Michigan. So everybody's got 1, and Washington loses to Oregon. Everybody's got 1 loss except us. Are we number 1?
Wait. No, because Ohio State wouldn't have a loss, right? Who do they have them losing to?
I'm saying Michigan. Oh yeah, I guess.
Does Michigan lose to Penn State?
Yeah, let's say Michigan loses to Penn State and Ohio State beats Michigan.
If you're the only P5 unbeaten, you're number 1, I think. I should say. I
don't know.
Florida State should have been number 1 in 2014, and they weren't. They were number 3 because of the game control nonsense. So I can't say that for sure, but I think Florida State should be number 1 in that case, especially if they have another top 10 win against Louisville.
Yeah, that's the real kicker, isn't it? Is that if that Louisville team ends up being top 10, assuming it's 85% chance that it is Louisville in Charlotte. But, if it does turn out to be a top 10 win or a top 10 game against Louisville, I think that's really going to decide whether Florida State even gets remotely close to 1, assuming that all the other teams fall at some point.
All right. Well, is there any chance that any one conference gets 2 teams in this year?
Stuff has to happen.
Yeah.
There can't be this many unbeatens left.
I think we'd have to lose.
Yeah, it feels like Florida State losing.
Or
Washington losing, but maybe not even losing to Oregon. Some weirdness happening there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Listen, it's only going to get more interesting. You look at who Georgia's got left. You look at Florida State's got left. You look at who Michigan's got left, and obviously, conversely, Ohio State because they play each other. Curt, you've mentioned Washington several times. They've got a gauntlet in their season on the Pac-12. So we got 3 weeks left. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out outside of next weekend, where everybody in the Southeast United States takes an open week and pays somebody to come run around their field for 60 minutes or so. With I don't know who. Somebody's got Abilene Christian. Somebody's got Western Carolina. Somebody's got you. We got to get rid of. There's nothing. There's going to be no traction made next week in this poll thing. I don't think. Besides the Pac-12, I think they've got some conference games next week. They backload their schedules typically out on the West Coast, where you don't end with put a patsy in between 2 conference games or 2 P5 games. Yeah, it's going to be. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this thing plays out. I think the game Saturday night or Saturday afternoon in Tallahassee is going to be fascinating. I think the spread opened at 13 or 14, 13 and a half?
14, I think. I think it was 14. 2 touchdowns.
It's like 14 and a half now.
Well, it may go up a little bit since we said Johnny Wilson was practicing, so I'm sure that Vegas is waiting on bated breath.
Or Mario got a little bit coy about which quarterback is going to be playing, but
oh, Mario, he's a fascinating man to listen to talk. That was something else. Although, listen, there's a part where he talks about how important football is to him, and then he realizing he's talking about being life and death. We bleed for this. We live and die for this. And it's the most important thing in the world. And he goes, oh, other than faith and family, if you're in that kind of thing. Like it was the most.
Yeah, that's what he said. That kind of thing, right?
It's the most insincere thing I've ever heard somebody say.
That was
about faith
pathetic.
and
I heard
family.
that. That was pathetic.
It was really bad. You got a glimpse into who that guy is, and having worked for someone similar to him in personality, I can only imagine what it's like around that building on a daily basis. I cannot wait till we get to hear Todd Stroud stories from Miami once Todd decides
one day
to put the whistle up and find out what it was like. Because he worked for Richt, then
Mario, yeah,
then Manny, Diaz, and then Mario. He's been there for three staffs now. All right, guys, we got a lot going on. I don't want to hold us up any longer than we have to. Any final thoughts on the poll? We got Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, and Florida State. We know Ohio State and Michigan will more than likely one of those two, depending on what happens everywhere else. But if Washington stays undefeated, Georgia stays undefeated, Florida State stays undefeated, you would think that Ohio State or Michigan will fall out of this top four if that were to play itself out. So it's going to be fascinating to see. We will be back later this week with more on Miami. We've got a lot going on this week on the Osceola. We've got a ton of stories already up on the site today. As I mentioned, we've got Nick's feature on Matt Fryer. I just put up Takeaway Tuesdays, 11 things I think about Florida State and Florida college football after week 10 of the season. We've obviously got our daily practice reports, our daily videos. If you want to see some of what was going on at practice, you can take a look at our videos at theosceola.com. We'll obviously be back with our scouting report on Miami. We'll have our staff keys to victory and FSU Miami predictions. Guys, is there anything, Bob and Curt, any stories, any features you guys want to talk about that you're going to write later in the week?
I wrote a Conrad Hussey story today. We talked to him, and I don't think I thought about it until we talked to him. 20 guys have played more reps than him on defense, and he leads the team now in takeaways.
Well,
2 forced fumbles and a kick.
I'm very surprised that Jerry let you write that story.
He wasn't there.
Oh, but
we got a busy boss.
That is Jerry. That is Jerry's guy. I'm surprised. Jerry is now the linebacker / Conrad Hussey guru. Yes,
we just give him up the spine of the defense. He can have the defensive tackles too, if that's all right.
I'm gonna stick with the defensive tackles right now. They're playing pretty good. I'll stick with it. They got
Daryl Jackson looked good today. You're salivating, counting down the games till you get to see him play in a game.
Well, he will have the shortest career in the history of Florida State football. One game and off to the NFL.
Is everybody a Penn State fan this week?
If you want to read my take on that, there's a cheer section of Takeaway Tuesday that lets you know who you should cheer for. But yes, I'm cheering for Penn State.
Yeah.
I tell you who's cheering for Penn State so they can stop hearing all the nonsense. The committee. Yeah. They just want to stop answering all those questions.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about watching some videotape of Michigan and sending some signs to Penn State to help them out, try to up the equation, see if I can help James Franklin out. Because, James struggles against top 10 teams.
He does.
If that's what we're counting on, based on history, it doesn't look good for Penn State. Although, listen, you take enough cracks in a top 10 team, you're eventually going to beat one. You got to hope that this week.
He's due, right?
Yeah, he's due. I mean, you can't keep on losing forever. I don't think. I remember when I was in high school, Leon was the dominant high school in town, and the Lincoln-Leon rivalry was really strong. But we had never beaten Leon in the history of the school. In my senior year, we finally did. And good old Gene Cox, one of the most famous high school coaches in the state of Florida, one of his coaches in the state of Florida at one time. He still may be. He said after that game, well, every once in a while you're going to get one. It was finally their turn. Like, he gave us no credit for it. It was like the percentages. So anyway, I say all that to say this: there's hope for Penn State. So we'll see what happens. But we'll be back later in the week with more preview on Miami. Obviously, we'll have articles up every day. We're putting together our recruiting visitor list for this weekend.
Lots of good names coming in through.
Yeah, Nick's already got a recruiting roundup that we're adding them as we go throughout the week. Then on Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, we will post a more comprehensive list once we've got everyone confirmed for this weekend. But it should be a huge weekend on the field and off, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to watch us, listen to us, talk about college football, the college football playoff, and obviously Florida State. If you're not an Osceola subscriber, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. As you see on the screen right now, we've got a ton of stuff going on. Always do. You go to our message boards, interact with us, and we hope you'll do that. And then if you're just listening to us or watching us for the first time on the Osceola YouTube channel, we would hope that you would hit the subscribe button as you log off and then hit the notification button. So anytime we do a live show, you get an advanced alert. Guys, it's going to be a fun week. These weeks are always fun. It is very, very, very hard to believe that we're already into mid-November and the 10th game of the season, the 10th game of the Florida State football season. But what a game it has got a chance to be. And appreciate you guys joining us. And if Mark, you will do us the honor of signing us off, we'll call it a night.
Go Noles. Scalp them.